There is a question mark behind the title Wise Men. Because in some circles, those two words shouldn't be used together, wisdom and men. I don't want to stray into that debate today. Leave each one as a good congregationalist as well to his or her own prejudices and grant each other the freedom of conscience. People who have researched these figures, the three kings or the three wise men or the three, some people call them magicians or conmen, tricksters that arrived from the east. Some people are firmly of the opinion that they arrived 2 years late after the birth of Jesus. And these people who say that wise men do not exist, but that world history would have been different if those were wise women. They say that if they were indeed women and not men, they would have asked for directions and arrived on time. They would have brought practical gifts like a casserole. They would have cleaned the stable, and they would have helped to deliver the baby. And there would be peace on earth following that birth. We encounter these men only in the Gospel of Matthew. That is part of the unique stories of Matthew about the birth of Jesus. And the three men are indeed not the main characters. They are in this passage to an extent, but the main character in the birth stories of Matthew is indeed King Herod. If you read the verses in Matthew that deals with the birth of Jesus, if you leave the genealogy out, it's really a very short story that Matthew has, and in every part of that story, the golden thread, and well, whether it's golden is another story, but the thread, the leitmotif through all of them is King Herod. A very interesting king, a king that liked to build things. He was in the construction business. Built a beautiful temple, the second temple, and he built imposing palaces, some of which became his retreats, like the one on Masada. But he was also paranoid and very afraid to be usurped. He would do anything and everything to cling to power. He was also, by many Jewish people, not regarded as a legitimate king, because the Romans actually made him king. And he was willing to kill all his own children, the male children, so that they could not usurp him or push him out as king. That was also behind the story of him wanting to kill baby Jesus, because these men from the east told him, you know, there's a Jewish king that was born, and somebody that's willing to kill his own children would make it an easy business to get rid of this baby that could be a threat to him as a Jewish king. In the thinking of the time when Matthew wrote his story, which was probably towards the end of the first century, I think the wise men play the role of legitimizing, on the one hand, that Jesus was the Messiah, and that he was indeed not only the Messiah for the Jewish people, but that his birth had cosmic or at least global meaning. that these men from the east came because that birth was so significant that they came to witness that. They know there was something special happening. That was the epiphany, the revelation, the manifestation that they became aware of. On the Jewish side, that these men recognized how special and important the birth of Jesus was. From the other side, these wise men had the epiphany. It was revealed to them that this is the way of God. That in this birth and in the teachings and in his way that he will be in the world, God will indeed be revealed in a very special way. I have to confess that as somebody that grew up in the Reformed tradition, I never could get into Epiphany. It was a strange word to me in the first place. And I never really got the story, perhaps because our minister didn't make a big thing of it either. But I think it is an important festival. It's an important day, and the Christian church started more or less in the 2nd century after the birth of Jesus to celebrate this. And there's a host of different practices in different churches, the Eastern and the Western church, and one can carry on forever about that. I think a more important question is, for us here today, what does Epiphany mean? Are we doing this because it's on the church calendar, to the extent that Congregationalists bother with a church calendar? Is it just appropriate to do it, and to an extent it's a relief for the minister that he doesn't have to worry what the preaching should be about? Because it says, all right, it's Epiphany Sunday, so you have to address that. I think in the spirit of the day, like the author of the Gospel of Matthew, we should at least pause and today open ourselves to God's wisdom, open ourselves to God's Spirit, and to an extent try to experience that two-way process that I spoke about. The wise men receiving the revelation in this birth, God is visible. This birth that will bring wisdom, that will bring a way of being in the world that testifies to God's love. And it should also, as the wise men received that revelation, that they can testify through their presence to the Jewish people, then that this birth is indeed something that has global significance. For us that say that we are followers of the one that was born then, it should also be our firm commitment to try and embrace the wisdom and the message of the good news, to testify not only to the wise men, but to the whole world, globally, the message of the one being born is indeed good news, not restricted to us gathered here, but for the whole world. And for us in this very consequential time that we find ourselves in the history of our species, in the history of humanity, in the life of this nation, in this specific time in the history of this church, and also in a very consequential time, not only for us, but for those who will follow us. our children, grandchildren, and also the ones that we hope will walk in our footsteps in this church, in this congregation. I think we should try and gather wisdom and try to live meaningfully. I listen to people, many people say they suffer from the impossibility to digest all the news. They are bombarded by information, and so much of it is just noise that it gets impossible to discern what is real and what is not. And so much of it is fear-based, bringing bad news, bringing one negative thing upon the other. One scary event, one scary occurrence. And it's interesting, I read several articles lately where there's some statistics indicate and the trends indicate that there is a severe increase in depression among Americans for a number of reasons, but something like 30% increase over the past 3 decades, which is a huge number. So what wisdom shall we gather, and how do we live in this world today? Looking towards the past, trying to gather from the past what is good, looking towards the future. Also on this first Sunday of 2020. I want to offer a few suggestions with humility, not knowing that this is the ultimate wisdom, but also assuming my responsibility as somebody that is, or that was called, to try and provide leadership to a group of people, a covenant community, on how to live when we follow the teachings of Jesus. I want to say that the first guideline that I want to offer is that we should not disengage from society and from the world, no matter how taxing we find the bombardment of so much information and disinformation. It is indeed so that what I celebrated the internet in the beginning turned out not to be such a blessing. It is indeed the case that so much disinformation and misinformation and poor lies and conspiracies abound on what could have been a wonderful thing. In this process of getting used to the internet as a society and as individuals, I want to offer that we stay informed, but that we develop the resilience and the ability to do the censorship ourselves. There are enough websites that will tell us this is a rumor, this is a conspiracy, this is not factually true. We cannot expect of Facebook and the other giants in the tech world to do that for us. Business is too good. They won't do that. There are too many billions on the line to practice censorship. Therefore, it is our responsibility, until such time as society has figured out how to live with the internet, and especially with social media, it is our responsibility to use the means already available to check the websites when we wonder, is this true? And we have the responsibility before we just hit forward to all to do that, so that we are not instrumental in what has become a virus or a cancer in the information universe in the world. Stay engaged. Stay informed. Do not dislodge. The world needs us as followers of Jesus to stay engaged. The second piece of wisdom, the guideline I want to offer is, let us continue to act locally. Because so often you hear the refrain, I feel hopeless, or I cannot influence the global trends or the national trends. I have no say in that. Let us work where we have control over our environment, at least to an extent, where we can still influence things. Let us do the work at hand and continue like we are doing as a church. There is the Mental Health Forum that our Social Justice Committee is organizing, where people affected by mental health issues will speak in their own words about their experience. That is important work on a local level. The second Conversation Cafe will happen hopefully in February around the theme of healthcare. That is important work that we can do on a local level. But while we focus on the local level where we feel we have some control over our destiny, let us not disengage and retreat to the hallmark Topsfield village, where everything is perfect and this is so wonderful. No, let us acknowledge that we are part of a wider web of life, that we are part of the global village indeed, and let us maintain the wisdom to stay engaged and not disregard the bigger picture either. I want to offer a third guideline, which is probably the most difficult one, is to try and, in spite of what we observe in the world around us, for instance, the fires in Australia, every time you think you've seen it, but the worst of it, but it's just mind-boggling what's happening there. In view of such occurrences and many other negative trends due to the fact that we are just too many people on this planet, especially with our value systems that we embrace and espouse at this moment, and our economic systems as well. In spite of all that, let us try and walk that very difficult line between hope and despair. Let us develop the resilience and the ability and work at it individually, but especially among each other, to encourage each other, to look towards the future with hope, while acknowledging the reality that we find ourselves in. Not to disregard it and go into la-la land as if we're on a trip, but acknowledge it, but let us, as God's people, continue to live in hope. Because if God's people lose hope, then we better take something to survive the despair that'll set in. On this day, Epiphany Sunday, when we hear about the gifts that those men from the East brought, let us also bring gifts to one another. Let us bring, to follow their pattern, according to Matthew, let us give each other and bring each other a gift of truth, of kindness, and of courage. We will soon say the covenant. We will covenant together again, as we do around communion. And that covenant speaks of truth. Let us be people of truth. Let us grant each other that gift, that privilege. Because without truth, we give up integrity. And we damage what we call the body of Christ, this covenant community. In a world awash in ugliness and meanness, in a world where it is customary to see each other as the enemy, to denigrate each other, let us practice kindness and gentleness towards each other. Let the covenanted people lead the way in that and bring that epiphany to the world as well. And very importantly, let us give each other the gift of courage, of conviction. Because without courage, kindness will be everything, and truth will be sacrificed. But courage enables you to speak the truth in love and try and arrive at that balance where our presence in the world will be a life-giving one. Thinking of the wise men, let us be wise people, God's people. Walk in the light of that birth. Walk in the light of that love that was demonstrated. May we see that light, make it our own, and commit again as God's people to walk towards the light and to be the light of the world. Let us live wisely and bring each other those gifts. Amen.